So nice to see you all. If you can, please turn your camera on. It's great to see you folks. Welcome to Table Talk, a reimagined series that's created by and for underrepresented communities. My name is Andy Engel. I am Senior Programmer at Reimagine. For anyone who needs a visual description, I'm wearing my glasses. I got salt and pepper hair, colorful tropical shirt, and an orange background. This table talk is co-hosted by SAGE, a national advocacy and services organization that's been looking out for LGBTQ plus elders since 1978. So I'm going to tell you a bit about the series if you don't know already. The central question of Table Talk is, what does it mean to live and die well, specifically among groups that have been historically marginalized, who experience obstacles to healthcare and death care? Our vision at Reimagine for Table Talk is that it becomes a regular booster shot of sorts for knowledge, empathy, cultural humility, and community. While these conversations are by and for underrepresented communities, everyone is invited to these spaces to witness, listen, and learn. And you can view recordings of all table talks to date at letsreimagine.org/table talk. And I will post that in a few minutes. And I will also be sending you a recording of this table talk as part of the follow-up email. And I want you all to save the date for our next table talk on May 31st. It's on South Asian perspectives on palliative care with two physicians, Nahid Dosani and Aditi Sethi. Tonight's event will be a 40-minute discussion on the topic of end of life, values, wishes, and planning for LGBTQ plus communities. And it will be followed by 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A. For those who wish, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see the CC icon. You can get a live transcript of what's being said, and feel free to send me a note in the chat if you have any technical issues. I might be able to help you. The majority of us are Zooming in from the United States, also known as Turtle Island by Native Americans and their allies. I'm in Lenapehoking, also known as New York City. Let us know in the chat where you're located. And if you want to know about the indigenous land where you're located, you can check out this link, which I will put in the chat here, native-land.ca. So let me know where you are. One last thing before I introduce our speakers. The theme of our spring season at Reimagine is grief, growth, and justice. When justice is present, that means we feel safe and valued in society. In a dozen states right now, LGBTQ plus folks and their allies are far from feeling safe as rights and protections are being eroded. I want to encourage everyone to continue reading the news, stay engaged, and give money if you can. Taking action, both small and large steps, is critical to transform the world and make things right. And like the poet Maggie Smith said, we've got to keep moving. So now I'm going to spotlight our speakers. Let's see. Come on. Here's Jacqueline. And here is Marn. I've had the pleasure of collaborating with these two on previous Reimagine events, and I'm so glad to have brought them together. Jacqueline Boyd is a passionate LGBTQ plus advocate with over 15 years of experience in senior care and navigation and advanced planning. She is the founder of the Care Plan, the country's premier LGBTQ plus centered care management company. At the helm of the Care Plan's leadership, Jacqueline has consulted with national and local organizations such as SAGE, Diverse Elders Coalition, and AIDS Foundation Chicago to enhance services offered to LGBTQ+ older adults. She serves as the co-chair of One Roof Chicago, an intergenerational LGBTQ+ focused housing project. Maren Lucas is a multidisciplinary artist and end-of-life doula based in Harlem, New York, whose practice is at the intersection of art and health, spanning photography, video, and collaboration. Maren has worked with artists, choreographers, dancers, musicians, art directors, sex workers, healthcare organizations, and LGBTQ+ groups. With the Bardo Project, she collaborates with terminally ill artists nationwide to establish legacy projects, and you'll hear more about that. This table talk is presented in memory of Cass Boyd, Jacqueline's mother. Cass was passionate about the arts. She was a musician and was a model for caregiving, and her spirit is with us tonight. So there may be folks, Jacqueline and Maren, who are joining us tonight who may not understand the importance of clarifying values and wishes in the context of advanced care planning. So before we get into the whys and hows of ACP, can each of you provide us with a definition of advanced care planning?
Sure, absolutely. I think my definition changes over time as I learn more and as I grow more and have other experiences. But my definition in this moment is planning for the future you want and the future you'd like to design in advanced age, in times of vulnerability, and in the dying process. Maren, how about you?
I see it as values and wishes there being it's a set of goals or plans to honor your entire life and death and dying process. This could include medical care, legacy or memorial projects. That can include your spiritual practices and maybe even your burial or funeral plans.
And why, for us as queer folks, is this critical?
Maren, you want to go first?
Sure. Often we queer folks have left birth families and those constructs behind for good reason or for necessary reasons. And you have created your own family or chosen family. And you spend your whole life developing your community and living and loving within this community. And then at the end of your life, to have your wishes not be honored, sometimes birth families will sort of sweep in and place their demands and their idealism and maybe their spiritual practices and frameworks onto you and your community. And that's a huge loss of love and life and integrity. So I think it's really important that we make our own plans.
Just so beautifully said. So beautifully said. And I would add two things. One, that I think advanced care planning gives you choice, and people don't realize the ways that choice can be undermined and taken away if we don't look at aging. And I think the other reason is more hopeful, right? It's that we as queer and trans folks are in a position to age out and to live and die in a whole lifespan as exactly who we are. And that's something to celebrate and claim and recognize that our aging may look different. It may happen at earlier years than we'd expect. Our family and support systems may be different. We may require or desire different resources and processes than the traditional systems allow for. So for me, it all comes back to choice and empowerment.
It's beautiful. It's hard to not get emotional, even though this is a landscape that we're familiar with. You and I, Jacqueline, work in this territory, but to have an audience here to talk about these things, I'm sure some of these things are resonating with our audience. What you said about choice is so important. We deserve the same choices and freedoms.
Well, and I was really excited for this conversation because I think we have some overlap in what we do, but a lot of difference in kind of our pathways. Do you mind sharing a little bit about your journey to get to where you are today, and why, your why for why you do this work?
The why is that it is truly a calling. I think if you are already outside the box, I guess the way I arrive at my life decisions is it's a bit of a circuitous process. Being from a queer framework, you're already thinking differently, and you've already had to be very resourceful and maybe very intuitive about how you make decisions, how you find allegiances and alliances. And then I encountered a lot of death at an early age, starting with my father died at age 51 when I was 28. And that sort of set off this spiral of loss in my life. And I'm a natural born caregiver. And so I feel like probably since high school, embracing my queer community and kind of helping them to navigate oftentimes healthcare or equal access to housing or job opportunities. I've always been an activist. I can't separate being an artist and being an activist and just being a humanist. So I kind of came out, I think it's just the framework in which I think it's how my mind works.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you've been able to do, and I hope you'll share, a bit more about your practice, but I think what you've been able to do is integrate. And especially throughout the pandemic, that's what I feel like people are wanting is, I don't want to just be working a job. And I don't want to necessarily be working a job or dedicating my time to something that's out of line with my values and my communities and what I care about. So, can you share a little bit more about how you've pulled together artistry and activism in your doula work?
Sure. Even as an artist, I'm a bit outside of the art world in that I'm self-taught, and I've always had to kind of create my own job description. So I kind of feel like it's always been a very open landscape. But when I started the project of collaborating with terminally ill artists, that's actually how I arrived at doula work. I didn't know what an end-of-life doula was, but I'd always been a queer activist, and my best friend was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer and was terminally ill. And he knew I wanted to collaborate with the dying as an artist. And there weren't a lot of places that were very open to that. I was told no by quite a few hospice organizations that was not appropriate, or they didn't feel comfortable having me collaborate with their community. So I had to go outside of that and find my own community. And my friend Chris was gay and given a very terrible short diagnosis, and took it upon himself to, do this project with me. And I'll share just briefly slides with you so you can see a bit about this project here. One moment.
And I'd just like to say for everybody, I know we're going to have a discussion at the end and questions. Please put in the chat your memories, your stories, the things that are coming up for you, because it's really about all of us. Thank you, Chuck.
So this is the Bardo Project, and this is how I've been able to combine art and activism. And I do see the dying process as a social justice issue. Not everyone is allowed to die in the way they need or want to, or nor do they have equal access to, healthcare and resources. So I do see death and dying and doula work as social justice. This is my friend Chris here.
Maren, you got to share your screen.
Oh, dear. One moment.
There you go.
Thank you. There we are. So this was the project where I've been able to combine art and activism. This is my friend Chris Brunkhart. He is my first collaborator on this project. And his bucket list trip was to go to Iceland with his husband. And so I accompanied them on their honeymoon and drove them around in a camper van so that he could make his last body of landscape photographs. He was terribly ill on this trip, but was able to complete the trip even with a pretty major hospitalization along the way. And when we returned, he was actually able to produce a coffee table book and have an art exhibition and produce this book. And he passed away about 10 days later. So it was a very dense experience of about 16 months. But this is what really set my path with the Bardo Project. And this is work I'll be doing likely for the rest of my life.
That's so beautiful and meaningful and intricate and purposeful. How do you do that now with folks who you're not necessarily, that close with? Because I find that it's a different process when you're working with people you know and love, because you can shorthand a lot, right? You already know a lot of that history, you know their philosophy and their values, which makes planning or caretaking or creating these experiences different when you are just getting to know somebody for the first time.
It is very challenging. A lot. I'm a private practice end-of-life doula as well. So in those instances, I'm serving strangers and community members. And so those two things inform each other. Like the more I work as a doula, the more I actually learn about this artistic process. They inform each other. I've had to do a lot over the pandemic via Zoom and taking on new clients for this project, as well as doula clients. I prefer to be in person, but I've had to do a lot over the phone and email and via Zoom. And it is very challenging to kind of get people to be even further vulnerable with me, to express what their needs are and how to express who they are as a person. Your legacy is, sort of a framework of like, sums up your entire life, your whole ethos, what you were about, your hobbies, who you loved, who you shared your, community with. So I really have to do a lot of digging deep and interviewing people to get to know them and first gain their trust so that we can share stories. And that's really the only way I can do it. It's a lot of like deep interviewing work and waiting and listening.
Yeah, I think that's such a good reminder for folks for who I'm a new person. I'm Jackie, pronouns she, her, they, them. And what we do with the care plan is primarily care planning, very literal, but also care navigation. Like, how do you navigate these systems that weren't built for nuance and weren't built for wishes, but were built for crises and urgency? And it feels full of urgency when you're when you're dealing with medical issues that are very serious. And I think, in our practice, we really have tried to internalize trauma-informed frameworks. And what you're saying about trust, like it's not just words, it's a process, it's a journey, it's intention. And trust can be built in a short amount of time, but for some folks it takes a lot longer. So I think that's one of the pieces in terms of values in this work that it sounds like we really share, is the importance of trust and collaboration, going with people at their speed. I think that's super important, because I don't know about for you, but for me, in working heavily in LGBTQ plus and my Black and Brown communities, even people that want to talk about this, it tends to be on the later side, right? It tends to be like when there's already been a loss or when there's already been a crisis. And so to even get to the dreaming or the visioning, you have to work through fear. You have to work through grief. And then you can have that trust in place and really be with somebody in the journey. So I really appreciate you naming those values. So for us with trust and talking about whether it's, any stage that we meet people at, right? Because we work with folks who are chronically ill, we work with folks with disabilities, we work with folks who are approaching end of life. And I think that what's important is to take your time and have these conversations as early as possible and as often as is comfortably uncomfortable, right? Like if you never wanted to talk about advanced care planning, maybe start by talking about it once a year or by having, like some wine, potluck, and just talking with your friends about wishes. It doesn't have to look like a formal process, but it shouldn't wait. It shouldn't wait because you want to be sure you're making these decisions over time is my perspective. I like to know with my clients and with my family and friends, what are your wishes when you're, 35, when you're 45, when you're 55, when you're 75, so that if I'm advocating or supporting or just loving you through it, that I know in my bones what your wishes are. That's like the ideal when you can and when we can as community.
I love that you ask folks at different points in their life, because our goals and wishes really do change. What is important to me now in my 50s is very different than it was even a decade ago. And communication really is key. I mean, when people say, I don't want to talk about death, it terrifies me. Even my own peer group, they shut me down all the time because I badger them and bring this up a lot. I mean, you can't run into me at an art opening without me slipping end of life care into the conversation. And people are just like, oh, you're just nuts. That's your thing. But then I say, well, if your healthcare changes and the wheels come off the bus, do you want some white person in a lab coat that doesn't know you, doesn't know who you love, doesn't know your history, to make a decision for you? Should you not be able to advocate for yourself? And who in your peer group, your partners, your family, who knows what your wishes are? Like you said, like you want to know in your bones exactly what those wishes are. And if you face those things and make a list of those things and share them, maybe once a year, maybe it changes, you actually live your day-to-day life in a much more peaceful manner, I believe.
Yes. You're not alone. I was the weirdo in my friend group too. Like I was the one in my 20s at the club and it's 2 a.m. and I'm getting a call because I'm on call and like somebody had a fall or there's some crisis and I had to, step out and be Miss Businesswoman. And my friends were like, what do you do? How could you possibly be needed in this way this much? But I think people get it once they've experienced loss, right? Once they've seen just in many ways and I am not being dramatic when I say the horror story that can be our healthcare system.
Yes.
Right. I was just talking with a client today who is one of our longer term clients who we're going to be power of attorney for. And he was like, my dad was in the hospital, had all of the doctors in the world, but nobody was talking to each other and nobody could get a diagnosis. And I would imagine we all have stories like that, where it's not from intention to harm, but it's from disconnected systems that cause the pain and cause the stress. And it doesn't have to be that way. And we as queer people have always, if it didn't exist, we built it. And I think that's part of what these series are for, is how do we want to build a different path and a different story and a more loving journey for ourselves, where and when we can.
So beautiful. I noticed on there was a Reimagine thread on Facebook that was promoting this event, our talk this evening, and folks immediately started chatting back and forth about like how should we treat LGBTQ plus folks within healthcare systems equitably. And someone wrote something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing, but like, I'm gay and you just treat them like anyone else. And then somebody below that pointed out, yes, but things happen all the time that are really inequitable and unjust. And for example, the entire AIDS crisis, so many people saw loved ones not have their wishes be honored. And family members, even if they were totally estranged from that loved one that was dying, would sort of zoom in at the last moment and impose their wishes on how to bury that person, religious ceremonies maybe that person no longer wanted to be a part of.
Right.
And so a lot of good care and a good hospice care and good palliative care came out of the AIDS crisis, but we still need to tidy up what our needs are, communicate those needs to everyone, because those things are still happening, and I've seen it with people that you couldn't imagine that would happen to. You're like, they were this beacon in the community. How could the distant family swoop in and take them away, and then we don't get to grieve
Mhm.
as a community with them?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something I always try to bring up too, and why it's so important for us to have these conversations, because, and to hold each other close, to claim each other and to build intentional plans with your chosen family. It can't just be that like a dream of we're going to get old together and we're going to support each other. It takes conversation and mutual planning, because you can have that dream, but if you haven't invested together, if you haven't figured it out, if you haven't made the moves 10 years before you're actually going to need it, then it doesn't work. And, 9 times out of 10. And there's so many places where we're vulnerable, that it's not just one size fits all. And a big reason is because we age sooner, right? Like by age 50, 41% of lesbian, gay, and bisexual folks have a disability. For heterosexual folks, that number is 27%. And for trans folks, that number is 65%.
Mhm.
So we have, and the impact of AIDS is part of it, but it's not the whole story. It's stigmatization, it's erasure, it's invisibility, it's not seeing people like us in these systems, and a distrust of healthcare. So it actually is not just a one size fits all. And I see the treat people how you would want to be treated. The ask is really important, but even with the ask, healthcare isn't prepared. It's not. Your care is truly only as good as the person in front of you. And so there's a big invitation for us to really show up for each other in those vulnerable spaces and in end of life. But Marn, I'm feeling like maybe we should talk about advanced directives. Maybe. I think that
Yes,
was supposed to happen today.
Yes, I'm thinking this is a good time to lead in, because this is the how we can set ourselves up so that people know our wishes.
Yeah. What is your role? I'm just curious. What is your role with advanced care planning? Like, do you ever engage in those conversations in your doula work? Or, do you partner with people? What does that look like for you?
I can do some of that work with folks, but often with the doula movement being so new, all too often people find me very much at the very end. They might have, a DNR, DNH, do not hospitalize, do not resuscitate order in place. But then I have to make sure the family honors that. People panic, if someone's dying at home, call 911. And so I have to kind of be a bit of an enforcer in that way. But oftentimes people find me a bit late. Our hope as doulas is that we get plugged in much sooner and can help assist with that. There are doulas who specialize in helping with making that paperwork happen in a much more timely manner.
Maren, can I just quickly jump in? There was a question in the chat about defining an end-of-life doula. Can you do that for us?
Sure. We are a non-medical role. It's more of a spiritual support role to hold space for the dying. So we are not giving medicine or turning patients, but we are there to advocate for their spiritual, end-of-life care wishes, their physical wishes. What sort of space do they want to die in? How do they want to be remembered? We advocate for their wishes and needs. So a family might say, no, they don't like this kind of music or this kind of atmosphere. But if I've worked with that person, I can show the family members, like, no, here's a list of what they would like. They'd like for you to take your shoes off before you enter my room, meditate for 5 minutes, and don't bring your BS in here with you. I'm the dying person. And dying people are fussed over and aren't given a lot of agency. So I'm there to advocate for them. And it's based on the model of care of birth doulas, who traditionally would assist a midwife and be there to support the mother and the family. And then I also provide respite care, so family members and loved ones can take breaks, and we hold space for that dying person so they're never alone. Let's get to the juicy part. Jacqueline.
We'll get to the infomercial part. All right. Well, first, just leading into this, I would love to show you all a picture of my beautiful mother, because I wouldn't be doing this work if it wasn't for her. She passed away on April 8th. So I am very much in that grief process, grief and growth. But my mom was my template for care. And pardon me if I get a little choked up, but she truly embodied unconditional love, and would love you through anything, and had a big, wide love for kids, for young people, for all of my friends. She and my dad, were relatively accepting when I came out in my early 20s. But since then, all of my queer and trans friends are their sons and daughters too. And it's just been a really beautiful journey for us. And we had done advanced care planning with her, and I had been able to do advanced care planning with her over time. And it was really kind of a perfect model for how I at least would want to do this, because feelings change, right? Feelings change, and how you feel in the face of death may not be the exact way that you actually feel, right? You may be coming with your fears, with your frustrations, with other desires. And so giving yourself time to think about it over time sort of prepares the dying person as well to wrestle with these issues and to clarify exactly what they want. And that's what happened with my mom. She had had diabetes and rheumatoid arthritis for about 20 years and had really, really struggled. So many hospitalizations, so many interventions. She was somebody who wanted to live as long as she could. But that changed, and that changed over time as her treatments became less and less effective, and as her quality of life suffered. And she changed her mind. She went from saying, I want to be alive at all costs, to, well, really, I want quality of life, and I don't want to be at the hospital. And let's talk about palliative care. Let's talk about hospice care. And so I think advanced directives, it's as much the process as the paperwork, you all. The paperwork is incredibly important. That's the legal documentation of your wishes. And it's critical because if you don't do it, then you leave choice on the table. There is no substitute for a power of attorney or a will. And I know a lot of times people feel like, well, it'll go to my, my closest people, my next of kin, my this, that, or the other. If you don't have a will, anything you have, your apartment, your car, the money that you have in the bank, anything that you have will get tied up in probate. And it's going to cost somebody over $4,000 to navigate that process, and a lot of time and a lot of years. So it's really, really important for us to get our wills together. That's about, what do we want to do with our earthly items? So you can do that any number of ways. You can work with an attorney. There's a lot of really great not-for-profit legal options. Here in Chicago, we have the Center for Disability and Elder Law, the Chicago Legal Project. Look up in your city if you are trying to do a legal clinic to do advanced directives, or have somebody come speak to your group, or to get services for yourself. It's always great when you can to have an attorney look over that paperwork and to help you with creating your power of attorney forms. But like I said, the process is as important as the paperwork. So figuring out, okay, yes, what do I want to have happen with my earthly items? Who do I trust to make the decisions that I choose for my body, for my health, for my care? That's what that power of attorney for health does. And the power of attorney for estate, both powers of attorney are operational while you're alive, right? And you can set them up so that they don't kick in until you have lost decisional capacity, or until a doctor says you have lost decisional capacity. Because that's a question a lot of people have is, I'm signing a power of attorney, can they open some credit cards in my name or mess with my finances? Not unless you wrote it open, right? Not unless you're like, this power of attorney starts today. So most people, decide their level of comfort, and have documentation in that power of attorney as to when it kicks in. And the terms may be slightly different state to state. In Illinois, we say DNR and post forms that really give your doctors and the state clearance to not resuscitate you or to, respect your wishes in those ways. So just be aware the forms may be different in your state. I find that the triple A's in your area, the area agencies on aging, can be a good starting place no matter where you're at, because they're in every state, and there's multiples. If you're trying to find these resources, if you're like, what advanced directives should I have? They're not a bad place to start. Your LGBTQ center should ideally have some senior programming and somebody there that can connect you with local resources. As I said, the free not-for-profit legal services can be great. You can find an attorney in your area as well. You can reach out to us if you have questions. But what's most important, y'all, is having the conversations. And that tends to be a much more private process with you and your partner, your friends, your kids, your parents, whoever is in your life that you love, that's in your intimate circle. That's who you should have these conversations with. And I think there was a question about, what do you do if you don't have anybody? This is where, the intention and really creating the life that you want is so important. Because if you're in this room, you more than likely have the intention to be part of a community. You have the intention to have meaningful relationships. COVID has made that really hard, but please don't give up. If you don't have someone now, that doesn't mean you won't have somebody in a year. It's how you develop your chosen fam and let people know they're important to you and invite them into your life. It can sometimes be as straightforward as asking the question, if something happens, if there's a healthcare issue, here's how I would love to show up for you. Have you ever thought about that? Would you like some support? If something happens to me, here's how I'd like you to show up for me. Is that possible? Building trust over time and embracing your chosen family is so key. So I'm gonna stop preaching now. Anything coming to mind for you, Maren?
I'm seeing what you mentioned in the chat of, if you don't have someone, what do you do? Like, a lot of us did not have children, and so we don't have like the kind of traditional sort of steps, but you can name whoever, you can name who you want. If you have these conversations, it could be a neighbor or a college friend who is still your friend longer than anyone in your own family, longer than any of your partners or relationships have lasted. Have that conversation with that person. Do not be afraid to reach out for help and ask. It goes both ways, and you can dictate who you want to be your healthcare proxy. Your healthcare proxy you don't have to be a legally married person to have a healthcare proxy. It's important that you have one and have a plan. So just dig deep. There's got to be somebody in your life's landscape that could fit this role. And if not, like Jacqueline is saying, like, move towards that goal. We've already created our community so much by being, LGBTQ plus. So, we've made that step. If we can do that step, we can reach a little further and create how we want to spend the rest of our lives and how we want to see our end of life care planning work out for us and for each other. I want it to work out for all of you, not just for myself.
Jacqueline, I'm wondering if this might be a good opportunity for you to talk a bit about One Roof Chicago, of which you are a founder, because I'm hearing a lot of questions about what do we do when we don't have biological family members to care for us. And I'm thinking about this intergenerational community that you are in the process of creating and what possibilities there might be there for planning for loved ones in that community.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would also say, folks, if this is an urgent issue for you, if you're like, I really actually need a power of attorney right now, reach out to me. Reach out to me personally, and we'll talk with you and care plan with you to find what the right options are for you, because I know not everybody necessarily has the gift of time. So reach out. Our services can be sliding scale and free. It's not a problem. We would love to work with you and help you identify those folks. And somebody said, if your power of attorney is out of town or lives out of town, that happens all the time. What's important is boots on the ground and eyes on your care. So they, your power of attorney can be your best friend across the country, but is there, other friends locally that can kind of be checking in with your doctors, going with you to appointments, reporting back, making sure that there's like a team approach, or you can hire an advocate. There's a lot of gaps in our system right now, but planning ahead gives you more choice and helps you rest easier knowing you're not just alone, and leaving things to chance. Because, I think that is a good lead in for One Roof, because, not everybody is going to feel like they have somebody or that person is reliable. And so housing can be a real resilience factor for LGBTQ plus folks in particular, right? Because you can be part of a built-in community of other seniors and have a higher likelihood of meeting people that share your values, that, can help you with just friendship and laughter and light and all those things that make life, bring joy into our lives. So that isolation and loneliness is a real issue for many of our folks in advanced age, and housing can be a key, just a key protective factor, in feeling part of a community and extending meaning throughout the lifespan. Also, housing can be a great way to have that built-in support of, like a resident coordinator or a social worker in the building or as part of the program that can help you make these decisions and be sure you have a plan. So 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago now, One Roof Chicago was born out of an understanding and desire to bring the folks in our community who are particularly vulnerable and isolated, seniors and young people experiencing homelessness, together to be able to create home and foster those intergenerational connections in a natural setting, right? There's not a lot, let me not oversell it. There's about 35, I think, LGBTQ focused senior housing projects around the country. Most of those are independent living. And a lot of seniors say, well, sure, it's nice to be part of this community, but I was in a neighborhood before. I've been friends with people of different ages and stages of life, and that's what's exciting. I don't necessarily just want to be with folks in my age bracket. I want to share my knowledge. I want to grow these relationships. So we're really excited about the idea of intergenerational housing, where young people who have experienced homelessness, ages 18 and up, who are looking to stabilize, can be part of our community. And then it'd be 20 units of housing for young folks and 80 units of housing for seniors. And right now we are in the process of confirming a site. And also we're working on that senior care model. So we're figuring out, how can we get to end of life care and support, like from independence to end of life care, without building an actual nursing home. So we're trying to innovate because, we want it to be home. We want it to be home for folks. And there's also this gap for our folks of who's going to care for us. And so part of the model is a job training program for youth who are interested in careers in healthcare or aging services. So LGBTQ plus young folks can be trained on how to be CNAs or cooks or do maintenance or activities, and also be part of a supportive community. So that's a little bit about us. Anybody who's interested, reach out, and I'll put our website in the chat.
I beat you to it, Jacqueline.
You're
Um,
fantastic.
I'm wondering now, I feel like we are now primed to open this up for a conversation. So I'm gonna, actually, I'm gonna take these spotlights off so we can go into gallery view and we can see everybody. And I encourage you all, again, you can put your cameras on if you like, and you can unmute yourself and ask a question. Or if you're more comfortable putting things in the chat, we'll all keep an eye on that. So if anyone wants to ask, please raise your hand or just give us a holler.
I have a quick question for Jacqueline about One Roof. Is this the first of its kind in the country with this model of mixed ages, intergenerational living and training?
So the training component will be very, very, very innovative. There is a project in LA right now that is intergenerational. And so I think they will be technically the first, but ours will be it'll be a different model entirely. But we're so excited to see people understanding the value of intergenerational communal living. So yeah. We're innovating, but we're not the first.
I would want to live there.
Uh-huh. Me too. We'll have you out when we break ground. We'll have you out.
I would love to come visit.
I also want to just give a shout out. We have on this call Naomi Edmondson, who, like Marn, is also an end-of-life doula. And Naomi appeared in a previous table talk. So I'm glad that Naomi is here.
And I'd like to shout out Kelly Rice and Corey Bloom from Chicago. Kelly Rice is actually the project manager who's helping us develop the senior care model that we're doing this year. So big props to Kelly. So what questions? Yeah. Everybody was talking in the chat. Let's hear somebody off on the mic.
It's hard for us to read the chat while we're talking. So it's exciting to be able to take a quick look at the chat, and you all have lots of good points of view and questions. So I'd love to hear more from you.
Yeah. Michaela or Michelle, would either of you like to share a little bit more about some of your thoughts? It sounds like these subjects have been pretty close to home for you.
First of all, I would just like to thank you both for such an informative presentation, and Chuck, your moderation is just superb. I was just curious to find out what might be the criteria to become, in each of your capacities, the job that you do, like what would be the prerequisite?
Great question. There's a few different paths to being a care navigator or care manager. There's 3 licensing bodies around the country if you want to get licensed. We are an under-licensed field, which in some ways is good because there's not, like with caregiving agencies and home health, there's a lot of requirements to start a home health company or start a caregiving agency. If you're somebody who has a passion and has a significant amount of experience navigating care for your loved ones, either as a caregiver, just a general advocate for your friends, you might be a really good candidate to do this professionally. And you can do that and get your feet wet without starting an official business or without, launching an LLC or a company. For me, I knew that I wanted it to grow. So I did get licensed as a certified geriatric care manager. The requirements were not, too difficult. It was about, do you have the experience? Do you understand these ethics and values and how to do this? So it's not insurmountable. If you're interested, you can become a certified care manager or just start advocating for folks and helping people and see if it's something you want to turn into a career. Marn, how about you?
As an end-of-life doula, there is not a standard of licensing either. There are a lot of really great programs where you can do a classroom training or online training, and then you go out into the world and find like hospice organizations and home health places where you can do your contact hours and kind of get your feet wet. And I will say it's a constant learning process. I never feel fully proficient because every end of life situation is different cultures, different traditions. So I'm constantly learning, and I'm learning that I'm also not the right doula for everyone, right? Like if you're having a baby or you're having a ceremony or you're getting, a commitment ceremony or getting married, you want the same kind of sense of humor and traditions and jokes and food. Same with dying. So I'm really learning, like, where is my place as a doula? I want to help everybody, but that's not right. I'm learning to just kind of take my time and figure out where I can serve best. And for me, I also have this outlet of collaborating with terminally ill artists, and that's an artistic project, but it relies heavily on my skills as a doula. So that also takes me away from being a full-time private practice doula. So, but I am really, I would love if there was more of a standard for the training for doulas, because I find that there's not a lot of access for everyone. There's a lot of barriers financially and just culturally. So I'd like to see that change. And I was pursuing my kind of certificate through an agency called INELDA, International End of Life Doula Association. But along the way, I got frustrated with that process and chose not to pursue that. And I'm going to take as much training as possible. There's fantastic training that I feel serves a broader population. So I'm taking my time.
Yeah. I see we've got a couple hands up, maybe Naomi and then Corey.
Hi, y'all. This has been a really great conversation. A question that came up while I was listening was I was wondering if either of you had any advice or tips for navigating advanced care planning with individuals who have maybe limited capacity for decision making, or individuals who are navigating like mental illness who do want their plans like acknowledged and written down somewhere. Like, what would be the best way to provide advanced care planning for those individuals?
Great question. Marn, what would you say?
That is outside of my scope of my experience thus far. That is such an important question. And now I'm realizing, like, I have much to learn to support these folks.
Yeah. There's a couple of things I do, and I'm going to just put up a slide real quick. This is why the overtime piece is so important when you can. And when you can't, when decision-making capacity has been impaired. So legally, there's a point where you can't actually be decisional enough to do your advanced directives, right? And typically that is due to diminished capacity. And it's a very thin line. So somebody may not be able to pay their bills, but would still have capacity enough to say, I want this person to be my power of attorney, or I don't want this person to be my power of attorney. But there does come a point when someone does not have enough capacity legally to say, these are my wishes. What I always try to do is be as proactive as possible and have these conversations in calm settings, one at a time. And even with somebody who's in a mental health crisis, oftentimes that trust, that pacing, that not making it about paperwork or checking a list, but what's your priority? What do you really care about? Let's get down to the brass tacks. If they aren't able to do that, then I rely on past memory. Who has this person always been? What are the choices they've made, good, bad, or otherwise, right? Because a lot of times I'm working with clients who maybe have had poor judgment in different areas of their life. And just because they're making poor choices in that same area, that's actually a pattern. And it's a pattern that, I want to support your independence and support what you're doing and just do it as safely as possible. So I tend to, really look at the trajectory of someone's life. Who have they been? What kinds of decisions have they made? And how can I confidently be sure about their philosophy? And family and friends and chosen fam can be really, really important in that too. Yeah. Corey, how about you? And thank you, Naomi.
Oh, hi. I'm Corey. I'm in Chicago. I've had the pleasure of working with Jacqueline and Kelly. And to that last point, recently the care plan was working with someone. I'm a physician, and so I refer people for support from the care plan. And that thing that you're just talking about actually just happened to someone. I referred to them where they were decisional when they started working with Jackie and her team, and then were decided to not have that capacity a few months later, but had already been working with the team so that that there was a plan they could work on, like what her intentions and her values and were when it got to that point. So that was a really really helpful thing. My question, because I work in a community health center where people don't have a lot of money to pay for things like doula services. I know the care plan offers some sliding fee and free care, but I'm not sure about other resources. Like how can people find resources like doula or other supports in this realm who may not have a lot of money to pay for it?
Well, in private practice, there are periods of time where I will volunteer at nursing homes. I've worked at like some, pretty big institutional nursing homes that had like subacute care and dementia units. And I did that for like 2 years for once a week. I worked at this place out in Queens until the pandemic happened. I think there's a lot of doulas that, spend part of their time volunteering, kind of a balance of volunteer and private pay. I don't take insurance. I'm not set up to do that. But I'm also sliding scale depending on, the finances and the situation. So I'm listed under INELDA's website for doulas. That's where most people find me. And they have a listing for, every city in the country. You can put in what distance you're looking for, and every state in the country there's doulas. Naomi, do you have any recommendations on other listings for doulas?
I'm thinking about Nita,
Nita,
and I also feel like, I think you've already probably mentioned this, like a lot of doulas that I know are end of life care, people do offer sliding scale. So I feel like if worse comes to worse, the best way to find out is to just ask. Because like this is such hard work. I feel like it would be easy to find someone who would like work something out or work for sliding scale or work for free or work for trade. Like, again, the best thing to do is just ask.
And sometimes we cover each other. Somebody will reach out, and I'm in Harlem, and Naomi, I believe you're in Brooklyn. Like sometimes it's also just like you can't get to those people, and so you'll reach out to your doula friends and be like, hey, would you be interested in this case? I could do these days if you do the nights. Like I'm always willing to do the crazy shifts. I'm willing to do all night, weekends, because I don't have children, and I do have flexibility. So we do work with each other. So yeah, always ask. I mean, the whole thing here is like we have to ask for help. We really have to ask for help and always circle our chosen family into what we need.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The one thing I would add to that is, sometimes people don't recognize their gifts. And you might have somebody in your life who operates like a doula or operates like an advocate, right? That nurse friend that you ask every time, you have a temperature, or the person who, you respect their spirituality and they're somebody you go to for counsel and grounding. Sometimes you can see the gift in another person and ask them to show up for you in a certain way or do mutual aid. To be like, here's what I see in you, and what I would so appreciate us doing is, even if they can't spend the night or do that level of work, can you come by 3 times a week and just, sit with me and sing with me and, hold the space or do a ritual with me. I think what I'm trying to say is don't be afraid to design the future you want. And yes, ask for help. and also, just integrate people truly into your life and get rid of the shame that we have about talking about healthcare and money. Like, that does not serve us. We have to get rid of that to like be able to move forward. And thank you everybody who's putting thoughts into the chat. It looks like there's a lot of resources coming through. Kelly, I know you mentioned comfort and choices. If you have that toolkit, would you mind adding that in there, or the the website?
Yeah, sure.
And Kelly, I know you're a doula as well. Is there anything you would add here?
I don't think so. I think you guys have done a great job kind of sharing. I think the only thing that I would add to that I think has just been really powerful beyond the individual work is being able to have these spaces and promoting just more and more spaces where that we're talking about death, we're talking about loss, we're talking about grief, where it's not this, closed down piece. That's the thing that I really love about the work that I do, is being able to share those spaces and conversations with people. So I think that's just, probably the thing that I value the most out of the work I do.
Thank you so much. And these spaces, can we give some thanks to Andy and the team for all their hard work, making this look easy?
Thank you,
Diana?
Jessica. Yes.
Diana, how about you?
Hold on one second. I'm trying to open up my camera too, so that way you guys can see me. There. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I just wanted to let you guys know, I, in my short 45 years, have helped over 70 people in my life pass on. Most of them were hospiced in my care and my spouse's care. And the one thing that I have realized the most through COVID and through the pandemic, and finally getting back into my volunteerism with our local center as a facilitator, is this isn't discussed enough within our social group as a community. And I was wondering what would be the best way to begin a facilitation of these discussions, because there are so many of us that have passed, especially over the last 2 years, that I know their wishes weren't taken care of in a way that they would have wanted. So what is a good way to kind of start that conversation within my own community, and maybe give some resources to them to help them feel able to advocate for themselves? Is there maybe like a booklet of some form or something? I know hospice can give, but yeah, because I'm a birth doula. I haven't practiced in the last 5 years, and I understand death doulary, and that's kind of, I guess, basically what I do anyways, but I just don't have resources to help my community out locally.
There's a great booklet. I will share afterwards. I'll share some slides. The Conversation Project has a booklet called Your Conversation Starter Guide, and it's an easy booklet that it's like a little workbook. They have maybe a dozen downloadable PDFs on their website for dementia care, end of life wishes. But this booklet, you can really dig deep in these very digestible little chunks of information that you could do by yourself or with a loved one, and you fill out and answer all these little questions, and it really helps you come up with all the kind of nuances of end of life care planning. It's really, really helpful. And I tend to order those books in advance. When I have all my art shows and events, I have that information, and I get those booklets into people's hands before they leave and ask them, please have a conversation in the next week with somebody you love. Those are very helpful.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And Diana, I would just add, thank you for holding and comforting folks. That is a lot. That is a lot of people to say goodbye to. That's a lot of people to care for. And I couldn't quite tell from your question if you were wanting to, give resources like that, or sort of facilitate something yourself with your friend group or with your community. If you're interested in that, I would suggest, it can be helpful to have a little bit of of your own process around it. What comes to mind for me is like address the healing that needs to happen. That helps people open up. My team, when we need it, we host a remembrance dinner every year to remember the clients that we've lost, share stories, celebrate their life outside of just, you know, the funeral or whatever the last rituals were. So we hold a remembrance dinner. And I think you could maybe do something like a remembrance dinner, a lessons learned session, and then like claiming aging, right? Like a 3-part maybe dinner series, or at your local library or something like that, to give people space to do some healing, grieving, and then growing and claiming their process. So just some ideas, but you got
Jacqueline,
this.
I was
Do
gonna
what you
say
want.
that's an amazing idea, and I'm actually gonna bring it up because our center is really tiny. Where we are, I'm in California, but where we are, we're in a very red area. And so a lot of us aren't even out in the community. Like I'm one of the most outspoken people in our community, especially post-pandemic. And my give a craps are all gone at this point, because I've seen like so many people that need the help and they just don't have the buffer that's there. And I'm lucky enough that I think I've been through this enough that I can obviously be that buffer kind of thing. But it's more than that. It's just more about educating, you know, our people, because this can happen at any age, right? And we have so many young people that are in their 20s that are homeless currently too. And that is such a precarious situation. So even like the opening of a discussion, you know, I was hoping maybe I could get a way to open a discussion with them at the center, you know, like maybe plan a night. And I really, Jacqueline, enjoy the idea of maybe doing like a 3-part thing to help our community start healing, because we haven't had anything like that yet. So I'll bring it up to the director, because I think that's a very good idea. Thank you for all the help.
Yeah, and reach out if you want to collaborate. You know, I really love and enjoy embracing chosen family and like embracing these conversations. It's just such a lost opportunity when we don't give it to ourselves to do that. Andy, do we have time for another? I see Michelle's ready.
One more.
Great.
Okay. I just wanted to ask you guys, what do you do in terms of for self-care and to deal with the vicarious trauma that comes with all that your varying jobs entail?
It's also a work
Marn, do you
process.
have the
It's a work
easy
in progress,
answer?
too. It's a work in progress, you know. For me, nature is the thing that sort of doesn't necessarily wipe the slate clean, but it reminds me that I'm part of something so, you know, so much bigger. We're all connected by love, and I'm able to tap into that in nature. Like as soon as I see trees or I'm outdoors, I can kind of clear my mind, but be connected to love. And for me, that's the glue that keeps the whole universe together. So even though we see difficult things and I see people, you know, behave badly towards, you know, their queer loved ones who are dying, if I connect with nature, that seems to help. And getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise. I don't do enough. I spend too much time on the computer. You know, it is a work in progress. And every time I tell other people to be gentle with themselves, I can hear it. And I'm like, ugh, I need to do more of that for myself.
Yeah, and I do it a couple of ways. One, I stay alert because I see the toll that giving constantly takes on especially Black women's systems. I know too many Black women, Black lesbians who have died too young because they were giving it all to their communities and their families and caretaking grandkids and parents and everybody in their lives. And there was nothing left for them in their life. So I pay attention to those lessons. Like chronic stress is related to 8 of the leading causes of death. I don't want to be that story. So I just take it very, very seriously. I also this year with, you know, just the roller coaster that has been my mom's care and losing her, I've come to an understanding for myself. And then I've gone through periods of depression. There's things that bother me that don't bother me normally. I start to feel where I'm run down and feel where I'm resenting giving too much. And that's not who I usually am. But I realize that in my depression, when I go through those periods, there's instruction there to tell me where, even when I'm at my best, where I might be doing too much and where I might need to scale it back or adjust or tweak to keep that tank full. I also think there's really power in living into your passion. And for many folks right now, your passion may have run out in COVID. Like if you're in healthcare, you can you could have started out as, fresh-eyed and ready to go as anybody. And now you feel like you just don't want to walk into the building again. And that's okay. So I think, listen to the places where it hurts. Pay attention to the real score that is being kept in your body around your stress level and the trauma you're absorbing. Get resources, obviously, but like prioritize yourself and find places where you can re-engage in passion, not just the purpose that served you in the past, if that makes sense.
Michelle, I want to thank you for that question. I think that's a great way for us to move out of this conversation, because the caregivers, the care navigators, they need care. They have so much wisdom to share. And I'm just so grateful to you, Jacqueline, and to you, Marn, for spending this evening with all of us. This was a really excellent conversation. And let's give a round of applause for Marn and Jacqueline. Yes, show some love. Again, I will be following up with an email with the slides, with the recording, and I'm putting in the chat now. Hold on, let's get this. Yes, I wanted to tell you about our next table talk, which is focused on South Asian communities and palliative care. These two speakers are wonderful. And it's interesting to compare it with this one because one of the speakers is also an artist. She's a musician and she's a physician and she's an end-of-life doula. She's a triple threat. That's Aditi Sethi. And Nahid Dasani from Toronto is just a brilliant, generous guy who, talk about justice, he's the founder of a mobile van in Toronto that goes around the city and provides palliative care to homeless folks. Never heard anything like this. It's just amazing, like only in Canada. Anyway, thank you again. Come to the next table talk. And I wish everyone a beautiful evening. Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Take care.